Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trailokyam Sacharacharam, Tat Padam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita, Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha, Tvameva Vidya Dravinam, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Mavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So we are making our way through the third chapter of Gita, Karma Yoga, and let's review the 5 elements that Lord Krishna is going to address, not only in chapter 3, but chapter 3, 4, and 5. The first, act. Act, O Arjuna. Don't try to run away. Even maintenance of the body is not possible without action. How should we act? According to our Swadharma, the law of our own individual being, our Prakriti, where our vasanas, in fact, impel us. Every being is impelled into action helplessly by the force of Prakriti. But how do we do that? Third element, in the yajna spirit. We covered all those verses where Krishna uses the Vedic sacrifice as an image. To sum it up, we want to serve something greater than our own ego needs. Serve the principle governing the work that you're doing. Dedicate your activity to something greater than your own ego. Swamiji used to thunder, serve the society. So whatever endeavor it is, do it with the idea of seva, of service. Person who only works for the cash and the prizes and the status and the celebrity, here Krishna says, verily eats sin. Meaning, it will grossify the mind, further concretize the ego sense. And then we have now started to deal with the fourth element, renouncing our attachment to the karma phala, the fruits of action. Thy right is to work alone, never to its fruits. Keep our minds focused on what we're doing, not the end point, what we're going to get. All right, so we're now starting verse 19. You help us out, please, Deepa?
Sure, Jim. तस्मादसक्तः सततं कार्यं कर्म समाचर असक्तो ह्याचरन् कर्म परमाप्नोति पुरुषः. Therefore, always perform actions which should be done without attachment, for by performing action without attachment, man attains the supreme.
So, what Krishna is talking about here is the underlying theory of karma yoga, which is vasana purgation. What is a vasana? A vasana is a subset of sanskara. Sanskara is an impression. Can you see the lamp? How do you know it's a lamp? Somebody taught you it was a lamp. That's a sanskara. Sanskaras in and of themselves are not particularly problematic, but a subset is vasana. A vasana is an impression left in the unconscious as the result of previously performed egoistic actions, meaning I, Jim, am the doer. And my joy comes from this person, place, thing, or activity, or my misery comes from that person, place, thing, or activity. And then I engage in what we call chintya. In Hindi, it just means worry. In Sanskrit, it means after the fact mental rumination over the event. So I'm not in the now when it's done. I'm thinking, oh, that was so wonderful. That was the greatest thing in the world. That's where the pleasure is. And then that causes me to want to repeat it. So if we're moving around in our life and we're restless, irritable, and discontent, we try to sit in meditation, we've got the squirmies. Why? It's vasana pressure. That's what it is. Vasana pressure comes out of the unconscious, and the first indication of it is this sense of discontent. And then finally it'll tickle into desire of some sort and then impel us into action. Now, people foolishly think that I can just flip desire off like a light switch. And Krishna has addressed that. He says the person who gets rid of the objects of desire but allows the desire to remain behind is verily a hypocrite. But the desire leaves that person upon seeing the Supreme. We'll get to that. So I am filled with all this vasana pressure, no blame. I can't wish it weren't so. I can't pretend that I'm not a person with a lot of asana. What do? You act according to those vasanas, hopefully in a way where you're not a jerk. In a selfless spirit, the spirit of yajna, of sacrifice, and pay attention to the doing and let go of the results. This exhausts vasana without accruing new vasana. We want to spend ourselves in love, in service. surrendering the fruits, giving it all to Krishna, giving it all to God. So the idea here is practicing karma yoga lessens the vasana pressure. Let me see if I can give you a real world life example. How many of us, when we were young, used to love to go out to, say, the dance clubs? Spend all night dancing and maybe looking at the cute boys or looking at the cute girls and stuff like that. Now, you're over 30, 40, 50, I won't go any higher. Oh, I used to love to go to the clubs, but no, it just doesn't attract me anymore. We've burnt that vasana up. It doesn't drive us anymore. Or you may have other things in your life that drove you as a youngster, but you've exhausted those vasanas. We all have those kinds of experiences. So here we're trying to deliberately speed up that process. Work hard, serve the society. Do your best to work at what you love. If you can't, love what you do. And let go of the outcome. Had a conversation with a student. She'd called and she was in a conflict with her husband. They're remodeling parts of their house. She wanted it one way, he wanted it another way. And they were really at each other's, butting heads. And she's dealing with all these psychological things of, setting boundaries and not being abused and standing up for myself and blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, basically, that's just ego in conflict. The truth is, he wants to get what he wants, and you want to get what you want. Yoga would say you might try letting go. And she came to a place where she was able to let it go. And it was so funny. She and her husband embraced. The next day, he starts doing the construction the way she wanted. So when she let go of needing to have it her way, the whole situation shifted. She let go of the fruits of the action. So all I can say is try it. See whether or not you find that frees up a lot of energy, and most importantly, it gives us peace. I was talking with a neighbor, and he was starting to talk about all the mistakes he thought he made. There's just a little box on the screen. Am I still online? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was talking with another neighbor, and he was giving me a litany of all the regrets. This relationship, that house that he bought, it was too big, he shouldn't have done it, and blah, 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 blah. So the yogi also was able to let go of regret. We do what we do. We do the best we can with the knowledge that we have. But the outcome belongs to God. Karma yoga is not necessarily a way to hit all the green lights of life. We will have failures and successes. Everybody does. It's not proud of the karma. But this will give you serenity. At a deeper level, even life's tragedies can be useful to the person who's conscious, who's awake, who's woke AF, as the young people say. You can use it for your spiritual growth, endeavoring to let go and keep our hearts open. Any thoughts on this before we go on?
I have a question, Jim.
Please.
So if you're raised with the ideals of being, say, thrifty, don't spend too much money, and then you are making this, say you want to buy a house or some sort of expensive purchase like a big music system, and then you spend like exhaustive amounts of energy, like you're saying, wondering whether you should buy it, whether you shouldn't. It's, is it the right decision? What if you buy a house and you run into losses and it's not your thing and stuff like that? How do you advise, how do we use this lesson for materialistic engagement that we, purchases, for example? Like, what do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, everything you buy is going to break. That's an inevitability. I spent $600 on this Dannon tuner. It's not working. Of course, I've had it a decade plus, but that's what stuff does. It breaks. In terms of a house, what I would say, this is just off the top of my head, are you buying a house because you want to impress your friends? Are you buying a house because you like nesting and you feel really at home being able to do stuff? Are you buying a house because it's a good economic investment for you at this time? And you're being prudent? You look at those sorts of things. But if you're satisfying, these outside influence, well, my friends are buying houses. Well, I'm going to get on a good deal because interest is so low and I'm going to make a whole lot of money. Those are not what I would say are good reasons. Buying a house is a good investment for young people to secure capital for the future. Stuff like that. It's not for everybody.
No, but I was wondering, even the idea of prudence and, financial prudence is essentially a vasana cultivated by our upbringing, right? Like,
Well, there's nothing wrong with prudence. I love the old Sufi saying, trust God, but tether your camel. I'm not saying what you should do is be profligate with your money. That's just not being smart.
but not be attached to the outcome at the same time. Like,
No. I have a very dear friend, and he's got a good spiritual program. And he was doing really well, buying real estate, investing in stuff like that. And he was overextended in the downturn of 2008 and 9. He lost about $300,000 and ended up doing a bankruptcy. His entire savings gone. But he's got a good spiritual program. He was able to accept and let go and move on. I think it's the book of Job in the Hebrew scripture, says, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. But if you're not attached to the outcome, then you're going to be okay. Don't spend money that you're not willing to lose. And don't be afraid, because you're going to be okay. So you have to look at the tension. Are you being prudent or are you being fearful? Maybe that's a better way to look at it.
Hmm. Hmm. That's helpful too. Thank you.
Now, one of my favorites is Susie Orman. I just love Susie Orman. And I remember one show of hers I was watching, and this woman had bought a house, and she says, I don't like it. I don't like having to deal with all the repair, and I'm always worried about whether or not the roof's going to fall in. And, I don't feel like I have the freedom to travel and stuff like that. I just feel like this house is a burden. And everybody's telling me, you should have a house. And Susie says, you don't have to have a house. The point of these things is to give you peace and a sense of security. But if it's not doing that, don't have a house. So it's not, it depends. It depends. Now, if you have to put the fancy stereo on a credit card at 21% and then spend a whole lot of years paying it off, in the end paying twice what you would have ordinarily paid for, probably is not a prudent expense. You might try saving the money and buying something you can actually pay the money for. A lot of Westerners get caught up in consumer credit debt. Most Indians are more frugal than that, I think. I don't know, is that helpful?
Yeah, it's helpful. Of course. Thank you.
May not be. All right, next verse.
So this is verse 20. कर्मणेव हि संसिद्धि मास्थिता जनकादयः लोकसङ्ग्रहमेवापि सम्पश्यन् कर्तुमर्हसि. Janaka and others attained perfection, verily through action alone. Even with a view to protecting the masses, you should perform action.
So he makes a reference now, of course, to the story of Sita's father, King Janaka. There are several stories about Janaka's enlightenment. One of my favorites is he's at this great big party and he drinks a little bit too much. He goes out on the veranda to get some fresh air, and some celestial spirits, some celestial damsels come to him and sing to him the Vedantic truth. And because his mind was incredibly pure, he attains realization right there on the spot. The hearing and the knowing came together. Wham! Now, his life externals didn't change. He stayed being a king. He had his wives, probably. He fought his wars. He accrued wealth, had palaces, did all the king things that the dharma of a Raja is. He was a king. Yet he was a man of wisdom. And his actions did not impede his knowledge. So, what does this mean? This means is that real renunciation, the meaning of it is not external. It's an inside job. It's not about running away from the things of the world. It is about letting go of attachment. And here Krishna says, your swadharma is not to be a sannyasi in the forest. Your duty is to fight this war. Do it. And act, fight, O Arjuna. according to your Swadharma, your Kshatriya, in the spirit of sacrifice. It's not about you. You don't want to be a Trumpist. It's about serving a greater idea, meaning to establish righteousness in the kingdom. Now, are you going to win or not? You have to go into battle letting go of the outcome. Any thoughts on this? Next one.
Yadyadacarati shrestha sattadevetaro janah sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanu vartate. Whatever a great man does, that other men also do, which is imitate. Whatever he sets up as the standard, that the world and the people in the world follow.
Now, this is one of the most important concepts in the third chapter. You may not know this, but when Swamiji was young, when he was young Balan Menon, he was a Marxist. He was involved in the movement for Indian independence, but he was not part of Gandhi's Satyagraha, his act of nonviolence. He was a bomb-throwing leftist. He was a Marxist. He was imprisoned for sedition. One of the things that Swamiji realized, Marx's idea is you've got the dialectical movement of history. There are economic structures that produce other structures as their antithesis, etc. And the structure itself cannot be the whole picture. Of course, the classic example is you look at, for example, communism under Stalin. The ideals may have been very noble, but it was a horrible sense of government. There was oppression, there was cruelty, imprisonment. Okay, what about capitalism? Well, that can be oppressive and cruel too. So what Swamiji understood was the heart of the people in leadership need to be noble. So we can look, for example, at Tibet. For hundreds and hundreds of years, Tibet wasn't even at the development level of capitalism. It was a feudal society. But the leadership were these Tibetan lamas with a deep spiritual program, a deep commitment to these spiritual principles. By and large, they did pretty well, even though it was underdeveloped and people tied to the land in a feudal way. So what's the point? The point is we need philosopher kings, as Plato called them. The men and the women who are leaders of our society must be people of character. Why? Because what the leader does, other people will imitate. What the leader says, other people will repeat. The values of the leader influence the values of the society. And I think our current political milieu is a classic example of that. Let me give you another worldly example. I used to teach at Cal State Hayward. I was a lecturer there. And one of the things that used to sadden me is the thought atmosphere among so many of the students was that cheating is okay. The smart person is the one who can cheat and get away with it. Where did they get those values? From home? From their society? Now, aesthetically, I have a dear friend who's a nurse, and he got his BS in nursing at USF, the University of San Francisco, which is a Jesuit university. So he had a Jesuit education. Not that I'm pushing Jesuit thinking, but he was taught values there. Various values. So, one of the ways I like to interpret this verse: go through your life as if someone was going to have a microphone and putting it in front of you, and what you're saying goes out to the world. Speak from your highest self, always. Act from your highest self, always. And if you start acting and speaking in this way, don't be surprised if you're not lifted up into a position of leadership in your field of endeavor. Do you gossip? Do you tear down other people? Do you shirk duty at work? Or do you act as a yogi? Now, you could say, I'm not a leader, I'm just an ordinary person through the world. Well, but still, our thought, our words and our actions affect the people around us. Here, Gita says, be a noble person. The word in Sanskrit is Arya. You know, that's word has gotten a bad rap as it's moved into the West because of what the Nazis used it for. But it's a beautiful word. It means be noble. Any thoughts on this?
Sorry, Jim, what was the word again?
Arya, A-R-Y-A. Aryan. Any other thoughts? My Sanskrit pronunciation is terribly accented. I apologize. All right, next verse. Oh, before we leave this one, there's a wonderful book out. I can't remember who wrote it. It's about Swamiji, and it's called Every Breath a Teaching. Swamiji always came from that place of the highest nobility. He was always in uniform, always fulfilling his role as a guru. All right, next verse.
न मे पार्थास्ति कर्तव्यं त्रिषु लोकेषु किंचन नानवाप्तमवाप्तव्यं वर्त एव च कर्मणि. There is nothing in the three worlds, O Partha, that has to be done by me, nor is there anything unattained that should be attained by me, yet I engage myself in action.
So now, Krishna, this is layered. So the first level, we can take it, Krishna as an avatar, as a person, divine incarnation of God. There's nothing he needs to do. There's nothing he needs to acquire or achieve. Yet he fulfills his swadharma in the world, which is to save. But we can also interpret this shloka from a more mystic place. We have what Gita will call this state called asparsha yoga. The root is prichati, which means to touch. Asparsha means untouched. Yoga means joined. So Swamiji would translate this term as the touch of the untouched. So that's the paradox of the Nirguna Brahman, self without qualities, and Saguna Brahman, Brahman with qualities. So the self in me is that awareness that's beginningless and endless and changeless, beyond the body, mind, and intellect. Kutusta, ever just still, no action, just awares everything. And the body, mind, intellect is the self appearing as name and form. So there is action in the midst of actionlessness, and actionlessness in the midst of action. The equipment is always acting, and that's part of God's plan. And the awareness never acts. It just illumines. Later, Krishna will call this my higher and lower prakriti. That's the language he will use. So for you and me, the body, mind, intellect acts in the world. Even sitting still is an action. And the self and me is never touched. Next one.
Yadi hyaham na kvarteyam jatu karmanya tandritaha mama vartamanurvatante manushyaha partha sarvashaha. For should I not ever engage myself in action without relaxation, men would in every way follow my path, O son of Pritha.
So again, we can take this on lower level and then the mystic level. On the lower level, Krishna as a leader. If he was a lazy, good for nothing, everybody else would follow in his suit. And we see this, I mean, it's so clear in our current political atmosphere. What the leaders have done, the followers have imitated on both sides of the political spectrum. But at the highest level, it is Krishna himself, by the mystery of Brahman contact, that causes the whole universe to move. And if Krishna were to withdraw his presence from the phenomenal world, nothing would happen. He is the enlivener of everything. Next one.
Utsi deyurime loka na kuryam karma chedaham samsarasya chakarta syamupahanyami ma praja. These worlds would perish if I did not perform action. I would be the author of confusion of castes and would destroy these beings.
So he's saying again, if he, as the Lord of creation, did not act, the entire universe would crumble. Now, we have to look at some of these phrases in Gita in their historical context. In the 4th chapter, I think it is, Krishna will say, I am the author of the fourfold caste according to guna and karma. The word for caste is actually varna, which is interesting, which means color. So we have to understand that Gita as a poem is written in a society which has elements of racism and classism. And there's no way to really avoid that. We can try to take the scriptures and find a deeper meaning in those particular verses that are racist and classist. But we also can look at it this way. Well, we've grown. Let me give you another example. In the Christian scriptures, one of the things that St. Paul says, women or wives, obey your husbands, slaves, obey your masters. The historical context was the entire Roman culture was built upon slavery. Nobody questioned whether it was right or wrong. Women were property. Nobody questioned that. Today we know that slavery is wrong. Today we know that women are equal to men. So we don't have a rigid view of this. So when he says there would be an admixture of castes, the historical period was whatever caste you were born into, you were to marry in that same caste to preserve a sense of class purity. It was a way to keep the Brahmins and Kshatriyas in power. There's really no other way to look at it. But we can suss out a deeper meaning. Meaning when people, because of the various external influences, find themselves needing to be in work that is contrary to their own nature, it starts to get problematic. So, for example, if you have great people skills and what you think you want to be is a teacher or maybe a counselor, but your family says, oh no, you need to be a doctor or an accountant or something that makes good, secure money, because those are our values. Well, you've got an admixture of caste here, you see. So the deeper principle here is we need to be true to ourselves. Authenticity is a much greater goal in the spiritual life than trying to be spiritual by superimposing some sort of a goody-goody idea. So I don't want to avoid this idea that we have a historical context that historically has been racist and classist. And it's still a powerful influence in India today and among Indians today. It's not as rigid as it used to be. Any thoughts on this? Back to this idea of guna and karma that we're going to get in the 4th chapter. Swamiji would thunder, but not janma, not birth. So if there were someone who came from a Brahmin family and they had been threaded, but what they were was a person who spent all their life in the marketplace, he would just kind of curl his lip and say, you're nothing but a merchant. Because that's where the qualities of your mind, guna and karma, your actions are. Antithetically, anyone of any caste could come take the brahmachari training course in Mumbai. You could be Shudra and still take the training course. And in the mutts, the Sringeri mutt down there in the south, only Brahmins are allowed to come. One of the exceptions is Chinmaya mission brahmacharis could come. So even if you were born a Shudra or a Vaishya, if you're a Chinmaya brahmachari, well, yeah, but you're a Chinmaya Brahmin, that's good enough. Doesn't matter how you were born. So they were a little bit looser. But this idea that only Brahmins can study the Vedanta, women can't study the Vedanta, it's all nonsense. Any thoughts about this? Any questions? So again, we try to suss out some deeper meaning, but we can't ignore that Gita does have its historical context. And we know more now. And no scripture in any religion is without those blind spots. All right, next verse.
Saktaha karmanya vidvamso yatha kurvanti bharata kurya dvidvamsta tha sakta ashchikishul. This is a very complex word. I'm going to give this another shot. Sakta karmanya vidvamso yatha kurvanti bharata kurya dvidvamstatha saktishch kirshul loka samgraham. As the ignorant men act from attachment to action, O Bharat, so should the wise men act without attachment, wishing the welfare of the world.
Yes. So here he practically talks about how to give up these attachments to the fruits. First of all, it's not just the ignorant men, it's the ignorant men and women. So those who are in ignorance act in the world solely for cash and prizes. More toys. What does that do? In the end, it simply thickens the vasana cocoon. But the wise person acts in the world, renouncing the fruits of action, with detachment. And this lessens vasana. Vasana is expressed, is purged, and you don't create new ones. And this lessens the vasana pressure in the unconscious. That's the theory behind it. Next one.
Na buddhi bhedam janayeda yanam karma sanginam joshayet sarva karmani vidwan yukta samacharan. Let no wise man unsettle the minds of ignorant people who are attached to action. He should engage them all in actions, himself fulfilling them with devotion.
So again, here's another lesson in leadership. There are people who manage through intimidation, who manage with a sense of, I'm the top dog, I'm the important one. Antithetically, an idea that's found its place in contemporary management theory is what they call the servant leader. I'm going to tell you a true story. The former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, is a 4-star general, Marine Corps general. My brother, who's a retired Marine Corps colonel, used to work for him. And my brother told me this story. When General Mattis was the commander of what's called CENTCOM, which is the command that deals with all that's going on in the Middle East. It's actually based in Florida. He happens to, they call him the warrior monk because he's unmarried and always has been. Brilliant man. He reads Marcus Aurelius in Latin. Thanksgiving was coming up. And on a base, there's usually an enlisted person who's there at the gate of the base. And they have what they call the officer of the day, who's usually like a lowly lieutenant, who's kind of in charge of the security and stuff like that. Well, this Thanksgiving, the lieutenant had a family, and Mattis knew that he wanted to go be with his family on this holiday, even though that particular day was his turn for the duty. So Mattis said, "Don't worry, I will take your duty." So the lieutenant goes off. So the officer of the day was a 4-star general. So a news person comes to the base and he wants to get onto the base and he says, "Pardon me, but who's the officer of the day?" And the guard at the gate says, "Oh, it's General Mattis." I said, "No, not the commandant. Who is the officer of the day?" And he said, "No, it's General Mattis." So out of the little kiosk comes a 4-star general in his dress uniform with his sword and everything to do the lowly duty that's usually given to a lieutenant. Of course, this story just went through the entire base and the entire Marine Corps. It was the way he demonstrated being a servant leader. So the idea here is, if you're in a position of leadership, understand that you are the servant of all the people who work for you, not the big mucky muck. Your job is to make their job work. This idea of servant leadership. Another true story. In 1988, I was in Siddhabari with Swamiji, and we were studying a text called Vivekachudamani. It was like a 6-week, 8-week camp. Went through the entire text. And all the brand new brahmacharis from Mumbai were up there. They were all in the front in their little yellow robes and stuff like that, and they were doing the chanting and stuff like that. And one of the brahmacharis told the kitchen staff that though we brahmacharis should be served first because we're brahmacharis now. Swamiji heard about this and he just hit the roof. And he just railed at them and screamed at them, "You've dishonored the Chinmaya mission. You've dishonored your status as brahmacharis. From now on, you are going to eat last, and you will serve all the other camp delegates before you eat." Next meal, it wasn't the kitchen staff feeding people, it was the brahmacharis. Now, only one had done this. All the brahmacharis had to do this because he wanted to instill in these young people who are going out as missionaries that they are servants. Now they call him Puja Gurudev, worshipful, godly guru. Best way to translate that. We used to call him Swamiji, but when he was asked what his title is, he would say, Mukha Seva. I'm head servant. I could go on and tell all sorts of other stories. There's Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. So those of you who are in positions of leadership or aspire to positions of leadership, think about this idea of seva, of being a servant. And the person who's in the highest position is just the head servant. Serve the society. Serve something greater than your own ego needs. Now, I have a secret for you. If you approach your life from the viewpoint, well, I'm not getting my needs met. I want mine. What's going to make me happy? You can go down that road. But it's self-obsessed, and it probably won't be very effective. If, on the other hand, you commit yourself to a life of service, I think you'll be a lot happier. And there's just like simple, practical things. Oh, Jim, I'm anxious in social situations. I go to a party and I just feel terrible and anxious all the time. And I might say something like, well, what you need to do is when you get there, be of service. Look around. Pick up all the glasses and take them to the kitchen and wash them. Go find the person who's sitting in the corner all alone. Go up and talk to them. Better yet, go up and listen to them. Be of service. Say yes to service in life. Any thoughts on this? It's not about codependence. It's not about saying, oh, nobody knows how I suffer. I do so much for everybody else. It's not about that at all. It's to understand that it's all part of this idea of exhausting vasana without creating new ones. All right. Which verse did we just complete, Deepa?
26.
26, we'll start 27 next week. We have time for questions. These are all such practical verses in this part of the third chapter. No questions?
I don't have a question, but just a comment that I think the story that you shared about Mukhya Sevak was very nice. Thank you.
Swamiji just didn't let go of it. He just railed and then went back to unfolding verses and then stopped and railed some more. Oh, he was mad. He was so mad because after 2.5 years, these kids had missed an incredibly important point. Or at least the one kid did. All right, let's sit. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vajishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om. Thank you all, and thank you especially, Deepa,